Again, good evening and welcome to Oscar J. Peterson Planetarium History Series. I am Susie Aber, Director of the Science and Math Education Center in Peterson Planetarium at Emporia State University. We present free custom shows, and it's been almost every Thursday since January of 2015. Our series covers U.S. space exploration, but it's about the people and it's about the equipment. And equipment needed in space exploration. And tonight, that's what we're going to focus on, and specifically telescopes and photography. These are specialties of our speaker, Mark Brown. Mark is an Emporia native for people that are here, and another Emporia native brought a booklet in today with Mark as a young person. I will say was a really cute little kid too in that picture, so you can ask Bill Ballard to show you that one if you'd like. Our speaker has the profession of geologist, astronomer, and photographer. He is a veteran of the Air Force. He has lived all over the U.S. and in several countries. Most recently is settled in Iowa, so he comes to us frequently on a volunteer basis and does things for our planetarium educational outreach, and will be back in June for the Star Party. So he's coming from Iowa, where the family is settled down, and probably wonder why he's such a nomad. We appreciate him coming. He's taught astronomy at many universities. He's worked as a geologist for the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, but his passion, educational outreach in planetariums, as well as science museums, science centers, and specifically using telescopes and conducting photography, and specifically astrophotography. He is the military photographic ambassador for Pocono Raceway, and if you know anything about that, we're talking NASCAR. And these are events with Air Force outreach and recruiting. Do they do flybys?
Yes, they do.
And they do flybys. So Mark has won many awards for his astrophotography. You're not going to remember all the specifics, so I will just say that he has published photos and articles in GSA, that's Geological Society of America, in NSTA, the National Science Teachers Association, Sky and Telescope Magazine, Astronomy Magazine, and numerous sites online. One of his awards was from the Pennsylvania State Parks and Forest Foundation. It's a picture of campers, 3 campers looking up at a stunning starry night sky and the Milky Way, and definitely an award winner. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mark Brown.
And as always, Dr. Aber, it's always a privilege to be able to come here and talk at the issue, specifically the planetarium, and to do these special talks that she's set up, and have been quite successful over the last couple of years. So it's been a great reward and honor for me to be able to come down here and help out and to do these types of talks. So yes, indeed, we are going to talk a little bit about astrophotography tonight and telescopes. We'll start off with telescopes first, and see if I can get the things to work here the right way. But for the purposes of this talk, you will not need one of these. So it's just for demonstration purposes, and even that is a little bit much for this presentation, but I'll give you an idea as to what that beast does, or what I use it for on occasion. But for the purpose, we're not going to get too much bigger than that telescope right there. We'll get on my soapbox just for a brief moment. This is a NASA map back in 2012, light pollution, or NOAA map, and showing light pollution across the United States. And when we're going to talk about astrophotography or telescopes, you can see that about half the country is pretty much inundated with light pollution. And so light pollution is very detrimental to preserving our night sky, for us to be able to do astrophotography, to do scientific research, whether it be a professional scientific telescope or even an amateur telescope. So it's very important even for amateurs, because amateur astronomers with these types of devices, and even smaller ones, are actually doing very good science as assistant scientists for NASA and other entities. So those yard lights, those lights that you light up your landscaping outside of your house. I don't know why you do it, but as for aesthetic purposes, I don't look at your house at night. I'm really much look at it in the daytime. So if you have outside lights, be aware of your neighbors' light trespass and things like that, because it is very detrimental to our skies and photography. So again, we have some of the larger astronomical telescopes, and they're used to gather light. And the larger the telescope is, the more light it can gather. If you gather more light, you can resolve more objects through magnification. So the key to a telescope basically is gathering more light, and that's what these big astronomical professional telescopes do. They gather a lot of light from objects that are very distant and very faint. So there are three primary functions of a telescope. First one is to gather light, or to brighten the image that you're actually looking at. It's called light gathering power. And it is proportional to the diameter of the objective lens. The objective lens is either that lens in the front of your telescope or the mirror in the back of the telescope. The larger that objective lens or that mirror, the more light that you're going to be able to gather with your optical device. The more light that you gather, the more that you're going to be able to resolve and see and magnify through that telescope. Magnification, there's an easy way, a little formula that you can use to calculate the magnification that you're using through a particular device. Believe it or not, with this device here, you can see Saturn's rings with just a power of about 50. So it doesn't take much to get Saturn's rings in view in a telescope like this. I can bring it into about 200 power, and Saturn's rings, Jupiter's cloud belts are quite stunning. But you can take the objective length of your mirror or your lens of your telescope, and basically on your eyepieces, there is usually it's stamped out with how many millimeters the focal length is of your eyepiece. And so if you take the focal length of your mirror or your objective lens and divide it by the eyepiece, you can get the magnification that you are currently using in your telescope or your optical device. And then again, we want to be able to resolve fine detail. When you look at the night sky, if you've ever seen the Milky Way, it looks like clouds in the sky, coming up from the horizon. These aren't clouds at all. Well, they are. They're actually clouds of stars. They're just billions and billions of stars out there, and they look like a haze or clouds. Your eye, although your eye is a very good lens, and it can resolve very fine detail to a certain extent, all that light is mushed together and merges together. Your eye cannot resolve that. You have to have an optical device to be able to separate that light into those individual stars so that you can see those stars. So we want to be able to resolve the fine detail of these big objects that we are looking at. So again, light gathering power, purpose is to gather light, a little bit of math. If you were to take compare an 8-inch telescope, an 8-inch mirror, to the human eye, and let's say you wanted to do the math, I'm not going to ask you to do the math, I'll do it for you. But if you take the human eye, and if its pupil is fully dilated, let's say about 7 millimeters, that's about the maximum the human eye can dilate. And if you take an 8-inch mirror, do the math, it's about 204 millimeters is what an 8-inch mirror is. Well, an 8-inch mirror can gather almost 900 times more light than the human eye. So you can get a lot of light coming into an 8-inch mirror and resolve so much more detail than the human eye can. So again, we want to gather as much light as we can and to be able to eventually magnify. So the analogy that I'll use is if you were to take a pinhead, a very large pinhead, maybe a 1/4 inch in diameter or a 6 or 7 millimeter pinhead, put it there and take your paper plate, take an 8-inch paper plate, and take some sand grains. Which one's going to capture more sand grains, the paper plate or that smaller pupil, or that pinhead? Well, the 8-inch paper plate is going to gather more of those sand grains, those photons of light which are falling upon it. So that's the analogy that I like to use about gathering light. And my daughter here, she is my model here for different lenses. And second purpose of the telescope, again, is to magnify, which means to make the image appear larger or closer. And one of the best examples that I can use are binoculars. A lot of people don't understand or realize what the numbers mean on the front of the binoculars, like 7 by 50 or 10 by 50. This here is your objective lens. It's basically like a lens of a magnifying glass. You've got two of them here. And the number 35 or 50 is the number of the objective lens in millimeters. All right? So the 7x or the 10x, that lets you know how much magnification this particular pair of binoculars is going to bring in. So if someone is standing at the back of the room, and if this is a 7 by 50 pair of binoculars, that person in the back of the room, when I look at them, will appear 7 times closer. So 7 by means it's going to bring in that object 7 times closer, and the 50 or the 35 is the diameter of the objective lens in your binoculars. So that's when we talk about magnification and things like that. Now, it's not always, you really do want to magnify an object, but magnification is not the main thing that you want to look at in a telescope. It is light gathering ability, because any telescope, any lens can be made to magnify to whatever, to 1,000 power. But you're not going to be impressed with the results. Let's say that you have a 3-inch lens or whatever, and you want to, and you magnify that lens, or you have the ability to magnify to 1,000 power. Well, if you are, when you magnify something, you are actually squishing down the field of view. Your field of view goes from this down to this when you magnify to several hundreds or thousands of power. And you're gathering less light from that object. And so it's going to become fuzzy. You're not going to be able to gather the light that you want. And when you're looking at it, you're not going to be able to resolve the fine details much, because you're not gathering as much light as you precisely back to a focus in the telescope and through that eyepiece. And they're least childproof, the least childproof type. So why would they be the least childproof of any type of telescope? Well, let me go back to the image here. One of them. So you've got your long tube there. Little kids love to stick things into long tubes for some reason. And so if they happen to pop off the lens cover at the top there, and I've seen this happen, let's say he's got a handful of marbles. Let's just put the marbles in there. There goes your mirror. Your mirror is now damaged. All right? The other thing is, because it is an open system, it's not closed much like a refracting telescope, it's going to collect dirt. Not only is it going to collect light, you've got dirt that's going to eventually filter in there, dust and things like that, and your mirror is going to get dirty. Usually you don't have to worry about it too long unless you're in a really dusty place, but you basically have to take that mirror out. You have to clean it with a mixture of mild detergent and distilled water. But it can be done. It can be also very time consuming, and then you have to realign that mirror with the telescope once you get it put back in place. So that's what I'm talking about, and it's the least childproof friendly. And you saw the image, the eyepiece is kind of located at the top, so it might be a little bit more difficult for children to reach, and again, it can accumulate dust. The reflecting telescopes, they're pretty sturdy. Because they have that mirror at the bottom, they are able to withstand and hold a camera attached to it, so they're not going to move too much. They're not going to get any flexure in the tube when you put that camera on the side of that telescope to take a picture of the moon or some other celestial object out there. So they are pretty durable in their design and can hold a lot of weight when it comes to photographic equipment. And the good thing is, so far what I've talked about, refractors and reflectors, they can be adapted to a tripod that has an equatorial mount. When I talk about an equatorial mount, that's a mount that can follow the motion of the stars during the course of the night. So any types of these telescopes can be mounted to be able to do that. So your compound telescopes, or your catadioptric or Schmidt Cassegrains, however you prefer to, these types of telescopes, this is what this is here. It's a compound Schmidt Cassegrain telescope. It uses a series of lenses and mirrors to bring light to a focus. At the front there is a corrector plate, which is a very thin lens, and so it corrects the light coming into the front of the telescope. It is a closed system, bends that light ever so slightly to come to a focus, to reflect off the mirror at the back, and then to come up to a secondary mirror at the front of the telescope, bounces off there, and out to the eyepiece. So you get a very long focal length package when you're talking about a telescope like this. Longer focal length telescopes that have a large mirror or a large lens, they're able to magnify a lot more, and then they bring in a lot more light. So I don't know if I'll be able to do this without And I'll just kind of give you an idea as to what this looks like. If you can look at this, there's the mirror. So the mirror's at the back, comes back up to the front, to a secondary. Right behind this circle here, there's another mirror. And so light will bounce off of that and then bring it to the focus through the eyepiece right up here. So it's bouncing back and forth several times within this closed package. Very rugged. Again, it's a closed package. You're not going to get you're not going to get dust and dirt inside of there. But they can be very expensive depending on the size that telescope that you get. So again, just kind of shows light bouncing back and forth within that package there. You have the primary mirror, you have the secondary mirror, and a lens at the front in which light passes through. And these are some of the designs. You'll notice that this is very similar to what I have, but I have what is called an equatorial wedge. My telescope's kind of tilted like that because I have the ability with this special wedge to be able to align to the north celestial pole. If you're familiar with what the north celestial pole is, it's not directly on Polaris, which resides about 1 degree from the celestial pole, but I can align very precisely on that point, and throughout the night, I can guide very precisely on a particular star or object as it moves across the sky due to Earth's rotation. So that's what we're talking about. The thing is that I find out, and we found out with Dr. Aver's telescope. Is this the type of telescope that you have roughly? We were, and I don't deal with a lot of other people's telescopes, but we were trying to get theirs to align and to be able to set up and to be able to track on the sun and so forth, things like that. We finally figured it out. It took some time, but what I'm trying to get at is that we need people who can write better manuals for telescopes. Because there's a lot of information that's left out and that people take for granted that they may not know. So if you are a person who does not know the night sky, does not know telescopes well, you're going to be frustrated with the use of a telescope. Because sometimes those directions just kind of give you a lot of grief sometimes. So when you talk Schmidt Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes, main advantage is portability. That's not very portable, but I wouldn't go, if you want to transport a Schmidt-Cassegrain or compound telescope, I wouldn't go much bigger than an 8-inch telescope, because it does take a lot of room in your vehicle. You got to have the room to be able to transport it, plus the tripod. You're looking at that system right there, that's about 150 pounds of equipment, right there, 150 pounds. So it has to be sturdy. When you're talking about equipment like that, and you have to precisely guide on an object, you want a system that's going to withstand the buffeting of the wind. Even a little movement of wind at high magnification can really mess up an astrophoto. Again, they are durable. They're less maintenance. They are more expensive than the refractors. And you'll be surprised that this is, if you get a good refractor will actually cost more than this telescope because of the way the manufacture of the glass is and the quality of the glass that has to go into a refractor. You can view these at high magnifications. You can resolve a lot of detail. Again, the bigger the mirror in these types of telescopes, the more light that you're going to gather. Doesn't quite produce as bright as images and sharp images as a refractor, but if you want to do mixed general observing with your photographic abilities or purposes, these are very good telescopes to go with within reason. So a 6 to 8 inch telescope in this type of design will do you quite well. And as I was saying about I forgot, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so when you purchase a telescope, bottom line is you want to do your research. You want to know the reason why you want that telescope and how you will use it. Case in point, how many of you want to lose a little bit of weight? How many of you went out and bought that treadmill? Where's that treadmill now? front of the bed, in the closet, in the basement, maybe sitting on the front lawn with a free sign on it. If you don't use it, you become frustrated with it because it's not doing what you want, you're not seeing the results. It's like a telescope. If you don't know why you want the telescope or how you want to use it, and you get the instructions that sometimes come with these telescopes, you're going to be frustrated. And it's going to be pushed away, never used. Much like that treadmill. That's my analogy. So my best advice is that buy the biggest reflecting telescope within your budget. You're going to get the best bang for your buck when you buy a reflecting telescope. It's bigger and cheaper than your refracting lens telescope, and you're going to gather a lot more light. You're going to be able to use a great deal of magnification to be able to see what we call the faint fuzzies or the faint objects in our nighttime sky. So again, all three of these types of telescopes, your compound, your refractors, and your reflectors, they can all be mounted to some type of tripod that will guide on the night sky. So again, do your research, find out what you actually want to do, because it can be quite cumbersome. If you want to, let's go back to magnification for a little bit, and let's say that you want to see Saturn, and your telescope is not on some type of equatorial mount where it's following the sky, all right? It's just a steady telescope on a tripod. And let's say you're looking at Saturn, and you boost up that magnification. Well, let's just take it up to 500 power, and you boost it up there, and you can see Saturn, you know where Saturn is, and you put it on there, you look in that eyepiece, you're going to see Saturn go zip, just like that. And you have to readjust it. When you get it readjusted, you look in there, Saturn's going zip, just like that. So sometimes it's better to use lower magnification, a wider field of view. And you can see Saturn's rings very well with a 2 or 3 inch telescope, and it'll stay in the eyepiece for a little bit, for several minutes, and just let it slowly drift across. But if you're using a high magnification, you've now reduced down your field of view, and it's going to zip across. So those are kind of the advantages and disadvantages of some of the telescopes and what you'll want to look for when buying a telescope. So that's it for telescopes. Do I have any general questions before I kind of go into astrophotography and how I kind of do some things? Yes, sir. I'm sorry?
It's like microscopes, not the same thing as a telescope.
A microscope looks at very small things. I'm not a biologist, so you're looking at like plankton and water samples, and so you're seeing very fine detail at a much smaller scale. I mean, you're looking at objects that have a large scale in the sky, but they're very small. You're magnifying. It's kind of the same concept, but you're looking at something very much smaller in that scale. Any other questions? Good question. Yes, sir.
All right, what's the size of your big telescope?
This is an 11-inch celestron. So it'll gather about 1,600 times more light than the human eye. About 3 times as much light as your 6-inch. About twice as much as an 8-inch. So it gathers a lot of light. But that's an 11-inch. And this is a type telescope which I should have my own observatory and permanently mounted so I don't have to take it from place to place. But it does take some time to break it down, to set it up. I wish I would have brought the video because I actually have a video of me setting it up, time lapse, and all the stuff that I had to do. But it's quite extensive to be able to do.
What size do the compound satellites start at? Telescopes, sorry.
Oh, what size is this?
Size.
Oh, yeah. You can start out at 4-inch. They have 3 and 4-inch compound telescopes. So, but on up to your 14 inches, which are usually in small observatories and things like that. But yes, you can start out very small with compound telescopes. In fact, my first one that I bought was a 4-inch Bosch and Lone back in the 1980s, and it was a very, very nice little telescope and did well for me. Saw Halley's Comet, but resolved a lot. So it was nice. It was a nice telescope. Any other questions? So we'll go back, jump into a little bit of astrophotography. Again, this was I like this because this was several years ago. I can't remember how long ago this was, but we just had a nice pairing of 3 planets and the crescent moon, and so I did a silhouette with my daughter. She was very cold. She had her parka on almost, and I said, well, let's go catch some fireflies, or celestial fireflies. So that's the name of this image, is celestial fireflies. So she just cupped her hands, and this is about a 3-second exposure that I took as my slide here. So she was my model again. So again, why astrophotography? Well, it's enjoyable. You see all these neat images from this Space Telescope, Hubble Space Telescope, and Keck, and these glorious images. The one thing that I will point out, when you're looking through a telescope, you're not going to see the colors that you see on these pretty pictures of boxes. That your eye cannot hold a lot of color in dark situations, and it's actually photographic film or photographic sensors on the back of cameras that are able to gather and hold the light. And infinity, sometimes those stars just aren't the perfect pinpoints that you would like to be able to see. So I would suggest looking at your live view and refining your focus so that they are very crisp and clear, because they can sometimes be a little bit out of focus and not pristine when you're focusing, or if you put it on infinity. Set the lens to its widest f-stop. If your lens goes down to an f3.5, if you know about camera lenses, the lower the number, like an f2.8 or 3.5, the more light that you're going to gather in that lens than, let's say, like an f8 or an f16 setting on your lens. So you want to be able to stop down that lens, or open it up, I guess you should say, to allow more light. The lower the f number, and I think I put that on some information on the sheets that were in the back there. But the lower the f number on your camera, the more light that you're going to gather, and the shorter your exposures will be. And again, aim the camera at a bright group of stars or a familiar constellation, and then when you're ready, open up the shutter for 20 to 30 seconds and take that image. And there's a reason why I say 20 to 30 seconds, because then you're going to start with star trailing and oblong stars and things like that. But I would start off, if you're interested in doing your first astrophotography and you have a relatively dark site, I'd start out 400. If you need to jack it up a little bit to maybe an ISO 800 or 1000, certainly experiment with it. But with short exposures of 20 to 30 seconds and ISO 400, you're going to pick up stars no problem if you have a relatively fast lens for your first astrophotos. Now, I was going back to the cable release or the remote trigger. Touching the camera or the tripod during exposure, this is your result. A lot of these cameras now have what are called mirror lockups. You can lock up the mirror, and when you start your exposure, it's just sending a signal to the sensor to start collecting light. So there is no vibration to the camera at all. And so these types of devices will allow you to not touch the camera or to bump it or anything like that. You can also, if you do not have a remote triggering device, you can set your timer. A lot of these cameras now have a timer that you can set. That'll give you a delay of about 10 seconds. So you're pointed and you push the button, it'll beep for 10 seconds and it'll open up the shutter. If you've got it set for 20 seconds, it will close the shutter. So that's one way that you can start and stop your exposure with your camera as well. But those are nice devices. These are called an intervalometer, or your infrared remote. Do not go through the manufacturer, like for Canon or Nikon. Those intervalometers are all out there, all different brands. If you go through Canon or Nikon, you're going to be paying anywhere from $110 to $140 for an intervalometer for your particular type of camera. You can go on Amazon and get an off-brand, and I paid $20 for mine. I have 2 of them, and you can actually research, find out which intervalometer will be useful or will work on your camera, because now you have some that have the 3-prong ports that plug into your camera. Others are just like an earphone plug. So all intervalometers are different. You have to have a specific one for your camera in order for it to work. But they are very cheap, inexpensive, and it's a good way to go if you want to reduce vibration in your astrophotos. So again, vibration just plagues the heck out of people and can ruin your astrophotos. Has anyone ever heard of the hat trick? Anyone know what the hat trick is? May I borrow your hat? Hat trick, it's got holes in it, but we'll go with it, all right? I used to use this for my film photography, and on some cases I still use it for my digital photography. Let's say that you don't have a cable release or remote shutter, and the only way that you can start and stop your shutter is by pressing the button and starting it. So the hat trick is, you've got yourself all pointed up and you're ready to go, lens is open, all your settings are ready to go. So basically, set it up, you push the button, and you wait, because your hand has touched the tripod, and there's going to be some vibration, all right? So you've started your exposure for a few seconds, let that vibration dampen out. This is what starts your exposure. You're going to have to count in your head, 1001, 1002, however many seconds you want, and then when you want to stop the exposure, and you click. You're not going to get the vibration, because this hat is what starts or stops. I use, for my GIMP, a very a dark, flat black piece of cardboard or plastic, whatever it is, something durable. You set in front of it, starts exposure, stops it. Thanks, sir. So that's the hat trick, and that's how you eliminate vibrations from showing up in your astro photos. So I'll kind of go through that. But that's basically what all this is up here. You're just basically not touching your tripod, your camera, or eliminate that vibration in your lens or in your tripod. So the hat trick. So start out simple. Find a star field that you're familiar with, the Orion, the Big Dipper, something that you want to photograph and try to and have bright stars. Tracking is generally not needed, but your exposures can be limited by by the rotation of the Earth. You'll start to get star trails. Wide-angle lens works great. Again, try to get the widest angle lens that you can, and a fast ISO setting, so we're around 400 or 800 to start out with. Longer focal length lens means that, again, you're magnifying, you're reducing your field of view. As I talked about Saturn, you're going to get more trailing in a shorter amount of time in your astrophotos. And then you can experiment with your ISO settings. Once you get your instant results on the back of your LCD, if you like the results, or if you want to refine, you can bump up that ISO, you can take it down, you can shorten or lengthen your exposure time, however you want to do it. Don't expect when you're taking pictures of constellations that you're going to pick up a lot of fine detail. You're not. These are very short exposures, and you might get a little bit of color in the stars or some nebulae in 20 to 30 second exposure, but nothing that's going to be hugely fascinating or anything like that. And it's also nice to add an artistic scene with some type of foreground objects, whether it be a building, a tree, or something like that in the foreground. If you're concerned about your exposure times, one thing that I've used in the past is what I call the 500 rule. Now, I did get this out of a book. I can't remember if it was in, might have been another one I had at home, but it's called the 500 rule. If you're concerned about your exposure times and when you're going to start seeing trailing, depending on the lens that you have, you can take the number 500 and you can divide it by the focal length of your lens. So for example, if I take 500 and if I'm using a 50 millimeter lens, and I take 500 divided by 50, that gives me 10, right? So that means that with that 50 millimeter lens on my camera, I can take a 10 second exposure and not expect any star trailing, but you're not going to be able to pick up a lot of stars unless you're using a high ISO setting to be able to capture that starlight. So your exposure time is going to be very short. So that's what's called the 500 rule. Take 500 divided by the focal length of your lens, and for example, 500 divided by 50 will give you 10 seconds. But what's really good is you can actually take this rule, take the lens and your camera, and make up your own chart for your own equipment. That would be a good scientific thing for you to do, so that you know when you go out, you know that you've got your equipment refined, you know what you can expect for certain amounts of exposure. But this can vary, and on this yellow piece of paper, when I talk about declination or altitude, when you're looking at the nighttime sky, the celestial equator is very close to Orion's belt, for example. It's about 5 degrees. All right? That's where the celestial equator, as it's projected up into the sky, is located, if I use Orion for an example. So stars are going to appear to move very quickly along that celestial equator as compared to in the north, closer to Polaris, at a declination of about 90 degrees. So you can take much longer exposures without star trailing in the northern sky than you can in the southern sky. So a little bit to read up on, but I always just use experimentation and trying to find which exposure is going to be best for me to use. So first astrophoto, this was again, this astrophoto many years ago, taken with just a 6.3 megapixel camera. Nothing exciting, just a camera on the tripod. Now, I will note that if you've heard of crop sensors, I'm not going to get into a lot of it, on your higher end cameras, they use a 35 millimeter frame, just much like a film frame, 35 millimeter film frame as the sensor. To reduce cost and so that people could buy digital cameras and take pretty pictures and do things, they reduced the size of the sensor. In my cameras, my Canon cameras, they are generally been cropped out a little bit, so you're losing some of that information, some of that image on the outside of it. So I have a what is called a 1:6 ratio crop sensor on my camera, so I'm not getting the full image of the 35 millimeter frame. So what's interesting is when we talk about the 500-second rule, I was using a lens set at 18 millimeters. If you do the math, what I had to do is I have to take this millimeter, I have to multiply it by 1.6. If I take 18 times 1.6, that gives me about the equivalent of looking through a 28 millimeter lens. Okay? All right? If you take 500 divided by 28, that gives me about 17 seconds, right, before my stars start to trail. Well, my exposure here was 20 seconds. If I zoomed in on that, I would see that my stars are just a little bit elongated. But for this purpose here, you can see that they look pretty much like pinpoints. You might see a little bit of elongation. But that's a little bit of use of the 500 rule. And again, this is ISO 400, 20 seconds. Not a huge, fast lens, but this is also in light polluted skies in Washington, D.C. This is a faster lens. This is a full frame 35 millimeter sensor in the back of my camera, and you can see how much more detail I can pick up. Of course, there was no light pollution here. A little bit of lights from a small town to the back there, but it was illuminated, or making silhouettes in the trees, and there was some, I think there was a light pole that was kind of illuminating trees from this direction. So even with a 25-second exposure, my stars are pretty much pinpoints, and I can pick up a little bit of color in the stars and Betelgeuse in the Orion Nebula. So with a fast ISO, fast lens, you can start to pull out some nice detail from the dark sky. Again, one of my light pollution plugs. So again, you want to kind of also give it an artistic effect with framing and scene with something. This one, I don't know if you can see it very well, this was also from a rural location. You can see I really love photographing Orion. It's just a neat one to photograph. But if you look very closely here, this is one single frame. I've got blips here. These are airplane trails. So I was photographing to the east. So this is air traffic coming out of New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, things like that, and flying across the sky. So sometimes you can get neat effects with aircraft as well. And I'll show you that here in a minute. But again, ISO 1000, very short exposure. My stars are pinpoints relatively, and a nice image with a nice foreground. So star trail images, very easy to do. You don't have to worry about having pinpoint stars if you're doing star trails, because you're going to create arcs on your photograph. And if your stars are elongated, that's fine. You can start another exposure, and it's going to add to it. I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. But kind of neat thing about star trails is you can emphasize the color of the stars. You can show the rotation of the sky, how much different parts of the sky rotate, like the North Pole region or the area around the celestial equator. So you can get different amounts of rotation and star trailing in different parts of the sky. So again, experiment with your ISO settings, your exposures. A lot of it depends on your sky conditions, whether you have light pollution, and again, adding foreground objects. So again, this was the image just a few minutes ago of the airplane trails. So I set my camera up, and I took several images of this particular scene. So this is the result after about 20 minutes. very nice color in the Orion Nebula. There's Betelgeuse, airplane trails. But I also have, point them out here, I have about a dozen trails here. There's a satellite right there, airplane trail. There's a satellite trail right there, and it's kind of hard to see in this image. There's a faint satellite trail right there going across. And you can see there's gaps in there. That was the 1 second delay before the shutter opened up again. But once you merge all of this together, it takes the star trails and makes it seamless across the sky. So you can pick out some very nice. So this was a composite of about 20 minutes, star trails of Orion. This one's a bit difficult to see. This is an old house southwest of Emporia. I did this in February and went on the person's property, an old house. Windows are busted out. I put red lights in it. So can you see the, can we darken this a little bit more? Go all the way. Sorry. There we go. Oops, wrong one. That better? Okay. So I didn't care if my stars were elongated. It was going to be a long exposure. And the lights of Emporia back there kind of illuminating, silhouetting the trees in the background as well as the house. Here's your stars. And this was a 20 or 25, I think these were 25-second exposures. And this is the result. A little bit of contrast, a little bit of brightness added to it. And things start to come out. Nice colors in the stars. Of course, Polaris is right up here out of the frame. But nice Polaris star trails behind this spooky house. ISO 500. And you can't really see it very well, but there was a farmhouse that had some light spilling out on the landscape. So this is actually illuminated a little bit here in the foreground because of the farmhouse and its outside light. So it's kind of some neat things that you can pick out there. So photo stacking, how do we do that? There are various types of photo stacking software out there that you can use to be able to take these images and put them seamlessly together. I use Photoshop. I do have some examples on the yellow sheet there as far as photo stacking software that will do star trails. I've not personally used them, but I believe that they're reputable. I went to investigate their website. I didn't see anything that would, I did download the software on my computer. I did a couple of test shots. I didn't see anything wrong with the software. But when you're looking at freeware out there, you have to be careful what you're downloading on your computer and so forth. So again, I use Adobe Photoshop for most of my image stacking purposes because I've just used it for so long and it does very well for me for image processing. That's an expensive part of it, of my photo processing that I use. But these are a couple of websites, and I also believe that they are on this yellow sheet of paper that you can find some of these websites if you want to seamlessly stack your star trails together. And it does very nice work if that's what you're into. Some other objects that you want to start out with doing your astrophotography. Wide-angle lens, you can pick up not only stars, but also satellites. Things that might not be able to resolve, but this is actually the International Space Station and Space Shuttle Endeavour back in 2011. And Endeavour had just separated from the International Space Station, had undocked and was making its way back to Earth. So you actually see two separate star trails, the fainter one being the Space Shuttle, and the brighter one being the larger International Space Station. So you can get some very nice satellite passes and things like that, coupled with a few stars. I used a short exposure as well as relatively low ISO because it was still twilight and I didn't want to oversaturate my image sensor on my camera. So I was able to pick up a little bit of the dark blue twilight sky with the satellite passes. A little bit long exposure, start to get the star trailing just from a camera and tripod, not guiding or anything like that. Space station pass, you've got the Pleiades and the Hyades star cluster right there. Longer focal length lens, just on a tripod, 200mm lens. You can pick up nice Earthshine, 4-second exposure, and Venus. A shorter exposure would have gotten rid of the Earthshine, and you might have been able to discern some of the craters in the crescent moon right here. So, again, this is what I talk about. Experiment with your ISO settings and your exposures, and even your f-stops of your lenses, depending on what other detail you want to bring out. Again, foreground objects are always good. You have Venus and the moon, with a crescent moon in the windmill there. Capture some very nice twilight images. These are just basic astrophotos on a tripod. I have a fisheye lens. Back last February, we had the grand alignment of the 5 naked eye planets. So with my fisheye lens, I was able to gather all 5 naked eye planets in one shot, and with a 15-second exposure at ISO 400. And I was also dealing with twilight here and a few city lights down here. One thing I love about having instant results, auroras are very difficult things to be able to pick up with the naked eye. I can take my camera out there, I can jack up the ISO setting, I can take a 20-second exposure. If there are auroras predicted for that night for my location, I can find out if the auroras are appearing before I'm actually able to see the intensity build with my naked eye. So I can actually test the sky with my digital camera and to see if the auroras are appearing, and then I can start taking exposures. I really wasn't concerned about my stars starting to trail. I was more interested in picking up the nice red and green colors of the aurora. This is a picture, Cherry Springs State Park in Pennsylvania, largest site east of the Mississippi. 20-second exposure, not guided, and a little bit of enhancement with contrast, but this is what the Milky Way, you can see a very good, a lot of detail with Milky Way with the naked eye, but again, the camera's capturing all that light, all that detail, and you're going to pick up a lot of interesting colors and detail with that camera. So you can pick out some nebulae, some clusters, and the stars start to be able to be resolved in these photographs. Simple tripod photography. This is guided through the telescope, so there is advantage if you want to, some of the expense, if you want to invest in more higher equipment, you can start guiding. Kind of got to start wrapping it up, right? So you can take your camera, I have equipment, I can piggyback my camera, not with this telescope, but I can take my camera here, I can take this mount here, take this telescope off, I can simply attach it to the top of my telescope, I can open the exposure, and if my telescope is precisely guiding on a particular area of the sky, and I don't want star trails, I can actually do that by what is a method called piggybacking to the back of my telescope. And again, it works well if we have an equatorial mounted telescope, much like this one here. So this is why people need a telescope with an equatorial guide, because otherwise you're going to get those unwanted star trails. And again, there's a piggyback setup there for a general sky shot. This was Cherry Springs State Park again. This was a 60-second exposure, not a high ISO because I knew the Milky Way was bright. I didn't need a high ISO, but a wide open lens. And if you look at the trees, you know it's guided because the trees are somewhat blurred. They're not very clear. But also I have streaks of the clouds that were coming by in that 60-second exposure. So I was able to pick up a lot of detail in a guided shot. And again, wide open lens. Basic equipment if you want to start getting up close to moon craters, the sun, sunspots, the other nebula. You need to invest for your camera. Again, you can all find this online. You'll need a T-ring, which specifically fits to the front of your camera here, and then an adapter, which will hook this back to the telescope. You can take this apparatus off, and I can actually take my camera and hook it back to the back of my telescope. So there are some things that you will need to invest in for your particular camera. But mostly, if you want to get those close-up shots of the moon, the sun and sunspots, these are the types of adapters that you'll have to start investing in if you want to get some more prettier detailed images. And you don't need guiding with these, but it does help. So you can do actually relatively short exposures with sunspots, the moon and Saturn, with your DSLR hooked up to the back of your telescope. And I get into webcam imaging. You take a webcam image of Jupiter, you take an AVI, and I'll use photo stacking software called Registax, and I will take each individual AVI or image from that AVI, and Registax freeware software will stack those images together, and this is what I can come up with as far as details Jupiter. So this is about a 1-minute video of Jupiter, and then all the images, those individual frames, stacked together to produce an image of Jupiter. Saturn, start to see the shadow being projected onto the rings. These are through an 8-inch telescope. You can see how the rings opened up at one point, 2005, 2008, they were, I think 2009, they were actually edge on. I was the first one to use a webcam at Mount Evans Observatory in Colorado. It was a 27-inch binocular telescope, and they were using, this was at the Mars closest approach to Earth back in 2003. So a very good friend of mine, Gary Crunk, and I went up there, did some comet research, and we did wanted to image Mars. And interestingly enough, we were able to pick up Olympus Mons and actually striking detail with a little bit of a shadow over here as the sun was coming in from this direction. So we actually blew away. I had a $100 webcam, and they were using an SFIG-5, which is a very high-end CCD camera, and my images blew their image away. They had no competition. I was picking up more detail than they were, just by stacking images. And again, you get to the nitty-gritty, you can see with very precise guiding, very nice finely tuned stars. There are pinpoints, a lot of detail, and colors in these images. So this is more for the advanced stuff, the stuff that I do for this beast over here. You can start to do comets, a wide-angle view. That wide-angle view was actually taken of that small telescope, that refractor on top, and then I had a camera on the back here. I put my other kind of guiding camera on the top there so I could guide on the stars of the comet. You see the trailing, so I was actually following the comet across the star field as it moved, and pick up some nice detail and filaments in the tail. So very high-end, starting to get into the higher-end astrophotography. I think this is real close to the end. This is I think it's a 70mm piggyback camera to the back of the telescope, to the top. Yes, 2-minute, high ISO. Very nice color here, nice pinpoint stars, guiding very nicely. I go to this device on the top here, the refractor, put my camera up there, and I put a guiding camera which guides on some stars on the back of the telescope. This is the raw image. I always shoot raw when I'm shooting the high-end stuff. And my stars, you can see, very nice pinpoints. This is a raw image, and you saw, this is the wide field view. This is the close-up view. So this star here, this star is right there. So there's that star, and there it is right there. You can start to see a hint of detail in the nebula right here. And then I stacked several dozen images together. This is the raw stacked image, and you can start to see the detail, but it doesn't come out in color. Now you have to go to post-processing. You have to start to pull out all that color and the detail that's locked up to discern the colors that you're actually capturing in the telescope. So a lot of people are actually a bit disappointed when they look in a telescope for the first time at a faint fuzzy object, and it looks grayish black, it looks like a grayish haze. And it's until you actually capture it with film or whatever that you actually start to bring out detail and color, because your eye cannot hold a lot of detail or color. And so astrophotos, they illustrate scientific principles, either at the professional level or even at the amateur level. As I said in the early beginning, amateurs are actually pulling in a lot of scientific data with their devices and their astrophotos. They introduce us to the various astronomical objects, whether it be the planets, whether it be galaxies, star clusters, or the moon, or even the sun and sunspots. So it's just a very neat thing to be able to show people and to use. And that's what I use, I get more out of for the third one here. It's the desire to provide and create my own images of the sky and to share them with others. And plus, through my many years of doing some astrophotography, it's actually allowed me to gain just a little bit of money on the side too, and in this hobby. So that's why I truly enjoy doing astrophotography. So astrophotography is indeed a journey into learning. You must have patience. It takes several sessions because you have to have the equipment, you have to have the camera, and sometimes you have to have the software. We can eliminate the software to a certain extent because that takes a lot of time and patience to be able to sit down and to be able to process those images. So that all depends on how detailed and how advanced you want to get into astrophotography. There's basically the equipment and the camera, which is your tripod and the camera itself and maybe some other little things. But you do want to be willing to experiment and to experiment with software, because in the end, if you get that pretty picture or you think it's almost perfect, but you may have some noise in that picture, electronic noise from the camera sensor, you can start to filter that out. You can start to take that out of your photograph, and you need software to be able to do that, depending on the speed of the sensitivity of the sensor that you boosted up to. If you're using like an ISO of 1600 or 3200, you start to introduce a lot of what is called electronic noise, because that sensor is now so finely tuned to trying to pick up everything, it starts picking up and inducing electrical signals onto your images. So you need to be able to start to experiment with some software, and again, look at the digital processing methods of astrophotography. And I'll give you some ideas, some information at the back, you didn't pick it up, and some websites that you can use to start to kind of reduce some of that noise and how to process your photos. I won't go into a lot about processing at all. It's just too much. I've only done imaging for DSLR cameras, digital single lens reflex. I've never gotten into the CCD imaging because of expense and time. You can capture images very quickly with CCD sensors, but if you're willing to invest a lot of time sitting back in the computer and processing those images, that's more time consuming than actually capturing the image at times. So you do not need a telescope like this to take beautiful astrophotos, not unless you want to get to the detailed deep sky or the think fuzzy stuff. All you need is a digital single lens reflex camera, wide lens. You always want it, if you're doing constellations or general sky shots and you want some foreground, use something that's less than 50 millimeters or less, because when you start getting up to longer focal length lenses, again, you're reducing down your field of view. And if you want that tree, if you want that landscape shot in there, you kind of want to open it up, because you can capture beautiful sky images with some foreground objects. And I'll get more into that as to why you don't want to necessarily use a long focal length lens. And of course, you do need a tripod. So this is generally the setup for astrophotography. Right there, camera, tripod, and a wide lens. So what I call shoestring astrophotography. It doesn't require a large investment in equipment, and it keeps you from going broke. Now, even when I was doing film photography, that was getting quite expensive, because then you had to process, you had to have someone process your images. And one of the things that always frustrated with me, I spent more money processing film than I did with probably putting money into my DSLRs when they finally came out. Because if you take a roll of 24 or 36 exposures during the night, you send that into a 1-hour photo place, and they look at that, what are they going to do? Because they can't see the faint images, they're going right through it, and you go in an hour later and you pick up your photographs, you might have one or two, he's like, well, what happened? You know, I said, well, there's nothing on the film. And so you hold up the light and you say, yes, you just have to see it, and that required them to have to do a little bit more of their photographic magic to bring out that detail and those colors and stuff, which you put someone who just is all about pushing a button and shooting film through it, the machine's not going to pick it up. So when I was doing astrophotography with film, I actually developed a very good relationship with the 1-hour guy, and he was actually taking 2 and 3 hours to process my photos and doing very high detailed stuff with it, with the equipment that we had. So he was showing me some tricks and pulling out detail out of my photographs when I was doing film. So when I first started doing digital, and I still use it to occasion, you can do very nice things with a 6 megapixel, 6.3 megapixel Canon DSLR. And I know that you can get them off of eBay still, but you don't need anything that's 18 megapixels or whatever. You can capture nice sky images with just a low number 6 megapixel digital camera. So, but the simplest form is to put your camera on a tripod and be able to capture those photographs. When we're talking about celestial subjects, we're talking about planets, the moon, star clusters, and things like that. It can be very simple to capture. If you're not sure that you will like astrophotography, but the idea is to start small and inexpensive. Start out with the basic equipment. Because if you get to where you buy all this equipment and you're not familiar with your camera, it can get very frustrating as well. So one of the key things is you need to know your equipment. You need to know your camera, how it operates, and what are all the bells and whistles. And the thing is, you do not need a lot of bells and whistles with these digital cameras to be able to capture night sky photos. So it is simple to learn. It can provide many hours of enjoyment. And again, this is more advanced, but your post-processing of your images in some case can take hours. You might spend more time sitting behind the monitor of your computer processing those images. So be willing to learn. Be willing to read up on it, read some books, and learn the night sky if you want to learn a little more about astrophotography. Again, left here, the technology hasn't, or the equipment really hasn't changed. It's the technology behind it. Film camera, you had a cable release, and you had a tripod. Today's digital, you've got a DSLR camera, you've got a wide lens, you've got your tripod, and now you can come up with these wired electronic devices. You can actually program these. If you want to take pictures of StarTrails, which I'll get into a little bit later, you can actually program this device, set up how long you want your exposure here, and you can set this on infinity as long as your batteries are lasting in here, and the batteries are lasting in your camera. You can run all night, take StarTrail pictures or any other objects and just let it go. And they also have remote triggering devices. A lot of these cameras now have infrared sensors. You just point a remote to it and you can trigger the shutter just like that. Film cameras you couldn't do that with. The advantage of using DSLR now, what I like, is I can get instant results. I don't have to send it to a lab to process. You can look on the back of your LCD and you can see if you've got anything on your sensor. So that's the beauty of DSLR imaging through your astrophotos. But again, it's the technology that's changed. So let's talk about your first astrophoto and what's required of you. First of all, you want to take your camera. And in the early film days, you heard of ASA. That was the sensitivity of film photography, whether it was 100, 200, 400, or 1,000. That was just a number that kind of indicated the sensitivity of the film, how fast that film speed was. And so you would have like ASA 1,000, which was good for fast shots, sports shots, action shots, things like that. But now it's kind of changed into this international standard of ISO, we call ISO, and it's a measure of the sensitivity of the CMOS or the CCD chip in the back of your camera that measures the sensitivity. So it basically mimics your film speed, whether it's ASA, so ISO 100, 200, 400, whatever it is. And there's a whole wide range of ISO settings. You can go up to almost 32,000 on some of these newer high-end digital cameras to be able to capture images just on a tripod. You want to be able to go out on a dark moonless night, starry night, and when you want to start taking your first astrophotos. The moonlight's great. You can light up your landscapes with moonlight, but I would suggest going out first if you're interested in doing stars or constellations to be able to go out on a dark, starry night. You see that image right there when I talk about setting your exposure to a B or an M? That's these settings right there. Now, B is for bulb. That's what it was on the old film cameras, the manual cameras. And the bulb setting, when you set up your camera and you've got your object in focus, and you've got your cable release or however you're going to trigger your device, you can keep the shutter open indefinitely. And I can lock this down, and that shutter is going to stay open as long as the batteries are charged, and they're going to hold their charge. But with digital sensors, you don't want to oversaturate them because film was pretty forgiving to some degree. I mean, you could capture a lot of light on it, and it would be pretty forgiving as far as the detail and the amount of light. Sometimes it would fog out, depending on sky conditions, but digital sensors, because they are so sensitive, you can oversaturate the sensor, and you usually want to keep your exposures pretty short, in the thing roughly under 2 minutes, depending if you're guiding or not guiding. But your bulb setting, you keep the lens open for an infinite amount of time. If you turn to your manual setting, I've got it set on 2.5 seconds. So all I would have to do is either trigger with a remote device or with this device here, and it automatically stops it. And I can program this to have a second delay in between exposures. So I could program this to take an infinite amount of images for 35 minutes, and I could go inside and have dinner and take StarTrails all night. Come back out, and now I have 150, 200, 300 images on my camera that I now have to put together and process. So, but that's the difference between bulb settings and manual settings of a camera. At least what I've learned. Again, you want to use some type of remote trigger device, your cable release. You want to turn off your automatic focus. Things in the nighttime sky are so faint that your automatic focus on your lens is not going to pick it up. And you can sit there all night pushing that button focus, your shutter release, and the camera lens is going to go zzz, and it'll do that all night. So the best thing is to take it off automatic focus, and there's a little switch on here. You can turn to manual focus. If you have live view, a lot of these new digital cameras have live view. You can bring up live view, and you can very fine-tuned focus what is in the back of the camera. So focus it on a bright star or an object. Get that focus refined so that you see pinpoint stars, and then point to the object that you want to photograph. But again, keep your lens also pretty wide open as well. Set the lens to focus to infinity. Again, I would still suggest you can do that, but even when you set it to, you could with a larger lens. So magnification is not always the thing that you want to look at. And when you look at these department store telescopes, they oftentimes give you the idea that, well, this can magnify 1,000 power. I guarantee you, it's going to be fuzzy. You're not going to like the results. And lots of times it's better to have a wider field of view with lower magnification because it's going to be much more appreciative of the object that you are looking at. And then again, to resolve objects. And the analogy that I can use here is that car lights heading down the road. You might see a couple of headlights or a pinpoint of headlight coming toward you, but that far one to this one, you're not going to be able to tell if it's a motorcycle because it's so far distant, your eye is not going to be able to resolve it until it gets closer, and then your eyes are going to be able to split those two headlights into separate objects. So just to give you an idea, at about 1 kilometer distance, the human eye can resolve about 1/3 of a meter. That's how good the human eye is. So at 1 kilometer, if you're looking at something, you can see something about 1/3 of a meter. That's how well the human eye is. A person who is visually 20/20 or 20/20 corrected. So that's how accurate we can actually look at or resolve things. And when you look at, and that's what I was talking about, looking at the Milky Way and resolving the star clouds, you want to be able to see those other pinpoints of light because there's other scientific data and things that we cannot see just with the human eye. So the third way or important point of a telescope is to resolve objects. There are three common types of telescopes: reflecting, refracting, and compound, or Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes. And they all use a series of either mirrors or lenses or both. And so we'll talk a little bit about refracting telescopes first. And refracting telescopes, they bring light to a focus with a lens. So it's much like a magnifying lens. And this telescope here is an example of a refracting telescope. Okay, cover up here, it has an objective lens right in the front there. This is about a 3-inch telescope. And so light comes in through here and is focused back at the back of the telescope and then brought through the eyepiece to focus, which brings information back to your eye. So this is much like just your regular run-of-the-mill refracting telescopes. It's not an expensive type one. It's very user-friendly, but it does use a lens as its front aperture to bring light to a focus. And the other analogy I was going to use is, we talked about a magnifying glass. Remember how you used to take a magnifying glass and on those hot summer days, sunny days, you used to fry the ants on the pavement? You're actually bringing light to a focus through that magnifying glass, and it's that intensity of light that actually is what you see from the sun or whatever. So bringing light to a focus. And again, these are just some common examples of refracting telescopes. And can you see Saturn's rings through any of these? Yes. Can you see Jupiter's moons and cloud bands? Absolutely. It doesn't take much to be able to resolve that detail through these refracting telescopes. Now, I will tell you that these, again, some of these telescopes are the ones, the long tubes that you find in department stores. And when you get to these long tubes and stuff, you can add cameras to them and you can take photographs through them. But now you run into the problem when you attach a camera to a long tube, you start to get flexure in that tube if your camera is heavy. And if your tripod is not sturdy enough, you're going to get that shaking motion. So the wind's going to buffet it, and so you're going to want something that's going to withstand wind and even small vibrations. Because if you open the lens of your camera, the sensor of your camera, you're taking the photograph through that telescope, your stars are going to jiggle, and it's not going to be very impressive either on the photograph or pleasing to the eye when your telescope is buffeting back and forth. So you get a little bit of flexure and in the tube when you start to add cameras and other heavier equipment. But these do just fine. They are very user-friendly. One of the good things about these types of telescopes, the eyepiece is towards the back. So it's very handy for small children because then they don't really necessarily have to get up on a ladder or a step stool to be able to look into the eyepiece to see objects in the refractors. So these are just some advantages of a refracting telescope. They are virtually maintenance-free. It is a closed system. The lens is very well housed in that tube there. Dust and dirt's not going to be able to get in there very easily at all. And it's easy to transport. It's a nice design. And when you're talking about refracting telescopes, you're talking about light that can be focused very precisely. You can get very bright and very clear images of the object that you are looking at. And again, the eyepiece is conveniently placed for small children to look at. Now, the one thing about refracting telescopes, when you're using lenses, you're using glass lenses, refracting telescopes can be the most expensive to manufacture because you're taking a piece of glass and you are now shaping it into a convex lens. And not only do you have to shape it on one side and then the other, you also have to polish it. You have to make sure that it is shaped to a very, very, very precise shape of a convex lens so that light can pass through it and that it can go to a focus. Lots of times, manufacturers will use a cheap kind of glass. There are imperfections. There could be an air bubble in it, maybe a slight hairline crack. If light passes through that light is going to wiggle around in there before it passes through, and it's going to distort the image that you are looking at. So it takes a lot of money, a lot of engineering to be able to manufacture some of the most expensive refracting telescopes and their lenses. Okay. Now the other thing about taking a big piece of glass, you don't see a lot of large refracting telescopes with big lenses. Why? That's a huge chunk of glass. And so if you put that on the front of that tube, you're also going to get flexure in here if you don't have a sturdy tripod. It's like binoculars. Can you imagine having 2 4-inch lenses and trying to hold that up to look at something? It's going to get heavy and you're going to get tired. They do manufacture lenses for binoculars and things like that, but they usually have them on very sturdy tripods or devices that you can lay back in a lawn chair. They're very well secured and you can just scan around the sky with those binoculars. But one of the things is they're very expensive because of that glass and it gets heavy. There are some telescopes, some of the older telescopes, but when they started manufacturing the lenses, that the glass was not very pristine. And over time, and I've heard this about church glass windows, stained glass windows, glass will actually begin to flow and to bend because there's so much weight. And some of the early stained glass windows would shatter because the glass would bow out because there was so much weight of that glass, and then they would shatter. So glass in telescopes can flow if the lens is very large. So those are some of the advantages, and again, some of the disadvantages. They can be very expensive, and poorly manufactured refractors are oftentimes the types of telescopes that you find in your department stores, science centers. So if you're looking for a refractor, you really do want to try to purchase from a reputable dealer. So those are kind of some of the advantages and disadvantages of refracting telescopes. But the thing is, sometimes the tripod is the thing that you really want to invest your money in if you want a good refractor as well. Next one is a reflector. Refracting telescopes bring light to the focus with a mirror. I don't have an example of a reflecting telescope, but I do have, which was kindly given to us to use for a demonstration. This is a mirror that came out of a reflecting telescope. The mirror is usually at the back of the telescope. So light comes in through the front of the telescope, bounces off the mirror, concave mirror, which has been precisely ground and polished, and then through a secondary mirror, and then out the eyepiece to bring it to a focus. So this is a mirror blank from a reflecting telescope, which would bring light to a focus. Now, as I said, for a refractor, ones that use the lenses, light has to pass through that lens to be able to be brought to a focus. When you're talking about mirrors, if you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror of your bathroom and you wonder, what is that? What happened to me? Why do I look so bad? Well, light has to come through the glass of that mirror. It reflects off a coating at the back of the glass, then it has to pass back through the glass back to you so that you can see it. So it's actually passing through the glass twice, that light beam. But when you're talking about a telescope that has a reflective coating on it, light does not pass through the glass at all. This is a glass blank that's been polished to a particular curvature and then coated with a very special aluminum coating. So light doesn't have to pass through the glass at all. It's easier to manufacture and less expensive to manufacture this type of a mirror because you're not polishing both sides of it. You have no reason to polish both sides of it. But they are very sturdy and they can be very heavy, much like refracting telescopes. But the thing is about reflecting telescopes that use a mirror, they generally sit at the back of the telescope too. So it's easier to move around and to maneuver, but they can be extremely heavy. So again, reflectors bring light to a focus with a mirror. And again, if you have a mirror like that, you're going to be gathering a lot more light on this than you are on something like that. And a couple of examples or images of certain reflectors. As I said, the mirror is down here, and here's your long tube. Light will come in through the top of the tube there, hit the mirror down here, goes back up the top to this spider beam, they call it spider beam. Behind that circle, right here is another mirror, the secondary mirror. Light bounces off that and then brings it out here through the eyepiece, much like this. So light's going to come in here, bounce off, hit this secondary mirror, and then right out through the eyepiece. So very good telescopes to start out with. Sometimes we refer to these as light buckets because they can gather so much light, and because they are so much more easy to maneuver and to handle, you can have much bigger mirrors at the back of the telescope which can gather a large amount of light. So again, as I said, we only polish one side of the mirror, and we're talking about reflecting telescopes. So they cost less to produce than other telescopes, and you can get more telescope for your money than you can with a refractor. So you're going to get more bang for your buck when you buy a reflecting telescope. It gathers a lot of light, as I said, produces good images of faint dim objects. Many amateur astronomers like these because they are so portable, and they do gather a lot of light, and that you can actually move these telescopes very easily around the sky. You don't have to have a clock drive that follows the motion of the stars or the rotation of the Earth throughout the night. You can basically star hop very easily with these types of telescopes. They're easy to set up, and if they're not too large, you can, they're actually quite portable. This is the type of telescope that I would recommend for a beginner, budding amateur astronomer, or even for a family. But as with all telescopes, there are drawbacks. They can be more fragile than other types of telescopes, and when you're talking about a mirror that is quite heavy, and it's sitting down at the end of that tube, it's held by a very large support, and you have some knobs down here, and it's already manufactured to be set, sturdy, and in place. But over time, if you're moving that telescope a lot, and you're dinging it around and banging around, that mirror can get out of alignment with that secondary mirror at the top of the tube to bring light to a focus. And so if it's not bringing light to a focus, you're not going to be very pleased with what you're looking at. And so there's a process when you have to adjust the mirror at the back called collimation to bring that light composite raw image. And once you do that, this is what you come up with. But this was about 45 minutes behind my computer screen and tweaking it. So I probably actually spent more time tweaking it and things like that. So with that, again, I've kind of gone through the basics up to some of the more advanced. And, you know, the thing is, go out and learn. Pick up some resources, some materials. Pick up a red flashlight, because you're not going to destroy your night vision, much like this, or a smaller one. Pick up a pair of binoculars. Learn the night sky first. Learn what you're actually out there wanting to shoot and capture on film, or in this case, on digital. Sky Telescope or starring magazines are great resources to pick up. Any one of these I've used, looked at, and they are good guides to be able to start astrophotography. I started out a long time ago with Michael Covington's. This was film photography. He had astrophotography for the amateur, and then he made one for digital DSLR. So this one is still out there. I think you can probably find this one if you wanted to do film. There's not much difference between the two, other than just the type of equipment and sensitivity of the sensor as compared to film. But that is about it.
If you go to emporia.edu/planetarium, you'll see many of these pictures and more, because Mark sends us a column every couple of weeks or sooner, and we put his photography on. He's also got his own website, and he has some videos too, so we'll get more links on there to those things.
Any questions I might really answer?
Right.
Or you can come down here and talk to me, that's fine.
Correct.
I'll be more than happy to try to answer some questions.